All right, so today we're going to really deep dive.
Deep dive.
We're going to deep dive into this whole world of sterile medications.
Yeah.
Specifically, how the EU Annex 1 really tries to control, keep everything sterile.
Right. It's interesting because obviously it's crucially important.
Yeah.
And there's so many different aspects to it.
Yeah. When I first looked at the EU Annex 1, I thought, oh, this is just about clean rooms, like how clean a room is.
Right.
But it goes so far beyond that.
It does. Yeah. And it's really about minimizing risk, you know?
Yeah.
And that involves, it starts with the design of the facility,
Yeah.
the design of the process.
Okay.
And then, all the different elements within that help to minimize that risk of contamination.
So it's more like a whole strategy, like a plan?
Yeah, it's a contamination control strategy.
Oh, okay.
CCS, they call it.
Oh, CCS. Okay, I see.
And it's a holistic approach, Yeah. It covers everything. Literally from the materials that you use to build the facility to the training of the personnel, the qualification of the vendors.
Wow.
The way that you introduce materials into the facility.
So it's not just the manufacturing itself, it's like the whole life cycle.
Yeah, the entire life cycle of the product.
Okay.
And every step of the way, you're looking at potential sources of contamination and how you can mitigate those.
So they think about things like, okay, what if this vendor sends us materials that are not up to our standards?
Exactly. Yeah.
And then they have procedures in place for that.
Yeah, and there are different, elements of it that I think are particularly interesting.
Uh-huh.
A lot of people think about microbial contamination as being the kind of the main thing.
Right. Yeah.
But it also covers particulate contamination
Oh.
and endotoxin contamination
Right.
and so on.
Yeah. I guess if you're injecting something into someone's body, you don't want any kind of particles in there.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's not just about the manufacturing process itself. It's also about storage and distribution.
Oh, wow.
The whole chain.
So from like soup to nuts.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I think is really important about it is that it's an active review.
Okay, so what does that mean, active review?
It means that it's not just a static document that you create once and then forget about.
Right.
It has to be continually reviewed and updated.
Yeah.
Based on new knowledge, new technologies.
So as new things come out, new ways to test for things or whatever.
Exactly.
They update the document.
You have to update your CCS to reflect that.
Okay, got it.
So it's a living document, really.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I guess you don't want to be using like a 1950s understanding of contamination when now we have all these new tools.
Exactly, yeah. And I think that's one of the things that makes it such a powerful tool, is that it's constantly evolving.
Right, so it's a contamination control strategy.
Yeah.
CCS.
Yeah. And then, of course, the CCS is going to dictate, the design of your clean rooms.
Right.
The classification of your clean rooms.
Yeah.
And how you operate within those clean rooms.
Okay.
So the clean rooms are really where the rubber meets the road, so to speak.
Yeah, okay, so let's talk about those clean rooms because I know that, from watching TV shows and stuff, I think they're really cool.
Yeah, they're pretty fascinating.
Everyone's in their suits,
Mm-hmm.
and it's super clean.
Right.
What can you just explain the basics of a clean room?
So a clean room is basically a controlled environment where you're trying to minimize the number of particles in the air.
Right, okay.
And there are different levels of clean rooms. So you have grade A, B, C, and D clean rooms.
Okay.
Grade A is the cleanest.
Okay.
And that's typically used for the most critical operations.
So it'd be like filling vials with medication or something.
Exactly, yeah. So that's where you really need to minimize the risk of contamination.
Right.
And then you have grade B, which is sort of surrounding the grade A area.
Okay.
And that provides a sort of a buffer zone.
Okay.
So that you're not going straight from, a dirty area into a clean area.
Right.
And then you have grade C and D, which are progressively less clean.
Okay.
And used for, less critical operations.
So like the further you get away from that filling area, the less clean the room needs to be.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, I see.
So it's all about creating a sort of a cascade of cleanliness.
Oh, okay. That's interesting.
Where you're gradually reducing the risk of contamination as you move closer to the most critical areas.
So when you say clean, what do you mean by clean?
Well, clean in this context refers to the number of particles in the air.
Right.
So there are specific limits for each grade of clean room.
Like how many particles are allowed per cubic meter or something?
Exactly, yeah.
Oh.
And those limits are both for the room at rest and the room in operation.
Okay, so what does that mean? at rest and in operation?
So at rest means that there's nobody in the room. It's just, the air is circulating.
Okay.
And in operation means that there are people in there working.
Oh, so obviously when people are in there, they're going to be shedding particles and stuff.
Exactly, yeah.
So they have to account for that.
Right. So the limits are much stricter for the room in operation.
So how clean is clean in a grade A clean room?
Well, a grade A clean room, you're allowed no more than 3,520 particles greater than 0.5 microns per cubic meter of air.
Wow, that's almost nothing.
It's pretty amazing, yeah.
So are they constantly filtering the air and stuff?
Yeah, they use HEPA filters, which are high-efficiency particulate air filters.
Okay.
And they're constantly circulating the air and removing those particles.
So you walk into this room and it's just spotless.
It should be, yeah.
It should be. Wow, okay.
And it's not just about the air,
Oh, what else?
They also have to worry about the surfaces.
Right.
So the surfaces have to be made of materials that are easy to clean. Okay.
They can't have any cracks or crevices where particles can hide.
Oh, okay.
They have to be regularly disinfected.
Right.
So it's a very controlled environment.
Wow, it's like being on another planet or something.
Kind of is, yeah.
Okay, so we have our clean rooms.
Yep.
We have our contamination control strategy.
Right.
But then what? How do they actually make sure that those medications are sterile?
Well, that's where sterilization comes in.
Okay.
And sterilization is the process of killing or removing all microorganisms from a product or material.
Okay. And that's obviously super important because we don't want to be injecting, bacteria or viruses into people's bodies.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
And there are different methods of sterilization.
Okay.
Depending on the product and the packaging and so on.
What are some of the most common methods?
Well, the most common one is probably heat sterilization.
Okay.
Which is using steam or dry heat to kill the microorganism.
Okay, so like an autoclave.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then there's filtration sterilization, which is using a filter to remove the microorganisms.
Right.
And there are other methods as well, like gas sterilization and radiation sterilization.
Wow. So they have a lot of tools in their arsenal.
They do, yeah.
Okay.
And they have to choose the right method for the right product.
Right.
And they have to validate that method.
So what does that mean, validate?
Validation means proving that the method is actually killing or removing all the microorganisms.
Okay.
So they do a lot of testing.
So that they don't just assume that, if they put it in an autoclave for an hour, it's going to be sterile?
No, they have to actually test it and prove it.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, so it's a very rigorous process.
That makes sense, though.
Yeah.
I mean, it's people's lives we're talking about here.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
It's very important.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
We've talked about contamination, control strategies, clean rooms, and sterilization.
Yeah.
What else is there?
Well, there's a lot more to it than that.
Okay.
But I think those are the main pillars,
Yeah.
of sterile manufacturing.
All right, well, let's take a deep breath and keep going.
Sounds good. I mean, it's amazing how much thought and effort goes into preventing contamination.
Yeah. And it's not just about being clean. It's about controlling the environment.
Exactly. Yeah. It's about managing those risks in a really systematic way. Like, remember how we were talking about the pressure differences between those clean rooms?
Oh, yeah, yeah. I was kind of wondering about that. Why is that so important? It's not just about keeping the air fresh, right?
No, it's much more than that. Think of it like it's almost like a dam,
Okay.
You're using air pressure to create these invisible barriers between the different clean room grades.
Whoa.
So the idea is to make sure that the air always flows from the cleanest area to the less clean area.
So you're kind of pushing those contaminants away from the critical areas.
Exactly, yeah. You're preventing those particles from drifting into those grade A zones where they could cause real problems.
That makes sense. So it's like a one-way street for the air.
Yeah, pretty much. And they're very strict about maintaining those pressure differentials. They've got all sorts of sensors and alarms in place.
Oh, wow. So they're constantly monitoring it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. If the pressure drops below a certain level, alarms go off, lights start flashing, and people know there's a potential breach.
It's like a security system for air.
Exactly. Yeah. It's all about maintaining those invisible barriers.
That's pretty cool. So it's not just about the air pressure. They also have to think about how they move things in and out of those clean rooms.
Right. Yeah. Transferring materials is a big deal. Anytime you open a door, it's an opportunity for contaminants to sneak in.
Yeah, I can imagine. So how do they do it? Do they have special airlocks or something?
Yeah, they have some pretty sophisticated systems. Ideally, they use double-ended sterilizers built right into the walls between the clean rooms.
Okay, I'm picturing like a tube or something.
Yeah, it's kind of like a sealed chamber with doors on both
Right.
ends. One end opens into the less clean area, and the other end opens into the grade A or B zone. They sterilize the items inside that chamber and then transfer them through without ever exposing them to the outside environment.
That's so smart. So it's like a super secure airlock.
Exactly, yeah. It's all about maintaining that sterile barrier.
So what about things that can't be sterilized that way? Like not everything can handle those intense sterilization conditions, right?
Right, you're absolutely right. For those more delicate items, they have other validated procedures that achieve the same goal.
Okay.
It might involve using a rapid transfer system for isolators or passing things through special ports with HEPA filters.
Gotcha. So they have backup plans for those tricky situations.
Yep, they always have to adapt and find the right solution. But even with all these fancy systems in place, we can't forget about the human factor.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. People make mistakes.
Exactly. And in this environment, even a small mistake can have big consequences. That's why the Annex 1 is so big on personnel training.
Okay, so what kind of training are we talking about here? Is it like a crash course in microbiology or something?
Well, it covers the basics of microbiology and hygiene, but it goes much deeper than that.
Oh, okay.
They learn all about contamination control, aseptic techniques, the potential impact on patient safety. They're trained to think like those contaminants.
Wow, so they're like contamination ninjas.
Yeah, something like that. They have to be hyper aware of their every move and how it could impact the sterile environment.
I bet the gowning procedures are pretty intense too.
Oh yeah, gowning up for a grade A or B area is like suiting up for a spacewalk. It's head-to-toe coverage with sterile garments. And it's not just about putting it on correctly. They're trained on how to move in a way that minimizes particle shedding.
So they're like gliding around the clean room.
Pretty much, yeah. They have to avoid any unnecessary movement or contact. It's all about maintaining that controlled environment.
It sounds almost like a dance.
It kind of is, yeah. A very carefully choreographed dance to keep those medications safe. And it's not just about the initial training. They're constantly being monitored and evaluated. They do glove and gown testing, air sampling, surface monitoring, all sorts of things to make sure everyone is following the procedures and maintaining those standards.
Wow, so they're really on top of it.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a high-stakes environment. They can't afford to be complacent.
That makes sense. So we've talked about clean rooms, air pressure, transferring materials, personnel training. It's a lot to take in, but I think we're ready to dive a little deeper into the sterilization process itself.
Okay, sounds good. You ready to explore the different ways they eliminate those pesky microorganisms?
Let's do it.
You got those filters are the real MVPs in these situations.
Yeah.
I mean, they're literally the last line of defense between those medications and a whole army of microscopic invaders.
Yeah, it's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it, just those tiny pores standing guard, protecting those essential medicines from contamination.
It really is. And it's not just about liquids either. Remember we were talking about gas sterilization earlier? Well, they use filters for that too.
Oh, right. Yeah. So it's like the same principle for gas filtration sterilization, just using those tiny filters to trap the microorganisms.
Exactly. It's all about choosing the right filter material and pore size for the specific gas they're sterilizing. And of course, they have to pay close attention to things like flow rate and pressure, making sure it doesn't stress the filter or create any leaks.
So they're fine-tuning the airflow through those microscopic pores, making sure it's all smooth sailing for the gas, but not for those pesky microbes.
Exactly. You got it. And of course, they still put those gas filters through the ringer with all those rigorous integrity tests.
Right. Got to make sure those tiny bouncers are doing their job, keeping those unwanted guests out of the sterile zone.
Absolutely no compromises when it comes to sterility. So we've covered heat sterilization filtration, but what about gas sterilization using something like ethylene oxide?
Yeah, that's the one I always think of when I hear about those delicate medical devices that can't handle the heat. How does that work?
Well, EO, as it's often called, is like a stealthy assassin for those microbes. It's incredibly effective against a whole range of microorganisms, even those super resilient spores that can survive some pretty harsh conditions.
So it's like they're fumigating those items with this sterilizing gas, eliminating those microscopic squatters without cranking up the heat.
Exactly. And they have these specialized chambers where they carefully control the EO concentration, temperature, humidity, exposure time, the whole 9 yards.
But it's all very precisely controlled.
Oh, yeah. They're not just pumping EO into a room and hoping for the best. They're monitoring everything very closely to make sure it's effective and safe. Because, of course, EO can be pretty nasty stuff if it's not handled properly.
Right. So after they sterilize the items with EO, they have to get rid of all that residual gas.
Absolutely. That's where the aeration process comes in. They basically air out those sterilized items to remove any lingering EO, making sure they're safe to use.
Yeah. So it's like a super thorough fumigation followed by a good airing out to make sure everything is safe and sound.
Yep. They leave nothing to chance. They want to make sure those medications and devices are sterile and safe for the patients who need them.
Well, I have to say, this has been a fascinating deep dive into the EU Annex 1 and the world of sterile manufacturing.
Yeah.
I'm definitely looking at my medications a little differently now.
Me too. It's amazing to think about all the effort and expertise that goes into making sure those medications are safe and effective.
Absolutely. To all those folks working behind the scenes, those contamination ninjas, sterilization gurus, and quality control detectives, we salute you.
Hear, hear.
And to our listeners, we hope this deep dive has given you a new appreciation for the incredible journey those sterile medications take before they reach you. So until next time, stay curious and stay sterile.